The yellowish light from the bus stop cast irregular shadows on the cracked concrete ground. It was one of those Tuesday nights when the city seemed to sigh wearily as the last workers dragged their feet toward the transportation that would take them home. The air carried the smell of exhaust mixed with the sweet aroma of churros from a nearby stand, creating a peculiar urban end-of-day atmosphere. Between the cold metal benches and the peeling columns, people waited in silence, each lost in their own universes of worries and hopes. In this everyday scene, Grace emerged, walking slowly with her light wooden cane, her arthritic fingers gripping the worn handle. At 82, her face bore the marks of someone who had seen the world transform many times, but her brown eyes still shone with a serene dignity that caught the attention of those who truly knew how to observe. She wore a carefully preserved navy blue wool coat and a small synthetic leather purse hanging from her left arm. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple bun, revealing discreet pearl earrings that had been a gift from her late husband decades ago. Grace approached the bus stop with measured steps, each movement calculated not to waste energy. Her legs, weakened by osteoporosis, craved rest after a full day at the hospital, where she had accompanied routine checkups. Bus number 47, which would take her back to the neighborhood where she had lived for over 50 years, usually passed every 15 minutes. She knew the schedules by heart, just as she knew the faces of the drivers who took turns on that route. She was a quiet, always polite passenger who greeted with a discreet nod and thanked with a genuine smile when she got off. When the bus finally arrived, its headlights cutting through the twilight, Grace positioned herself near the door. The vehicle stopped with a pneumatic sigh, and the doors opened, revealing a dimly lit and crowded interior. The driver, a middle-aged man with stubble and a tired expression, didn't even look at her as other passengers boarded, pushing each other. Grace patiently waited her turn, holding her cane with one hand and preparing her fare with the other. As she climbed the first step, her naturally slow movements caused the line behind her to become impatient. Someone sighed, loudly, another muttered something inaudible. The driver tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, looking in the rearview mirror with growing irritation. "Come on, ma'am, we have a schedule to keep," he said sharply, without even turning his face to her. Grace continued to climb carefully, concentrating on not stumbling, and extended the money to pay her fare. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from the arthritis that attacked her joints when the weather changed. The driver took the money impatiently, counted it quickly, and returned the change unceremoniously. "The priority seating up front is taken. You'll have to manage in the back," he said, already accelerating before Grace could properly balance herself. The bus lurched suddenly, causing the elderly woman to lean on her cane to avoid falling. No one got up to offer her a seat. No one even looked in her direction. Grace walked slowly down the aisle, holding on to the handrails as the bus swayed on the bumpy streets. Each jolt was a small battle to maintain balance. Her eyes searched for an empty seat, but they were all occupied by people who seemed to deliberately avoid eye contact. Young people with headphones, adults fiddling with cell phones, some even pretending to sleep when they noticed her approach. It was as if she were invisible, a ghost wandering the corridors of that moving world. In the middle of the bus, a man in a crumpled suit occupied one of the priority seats. He saw Grace approaching and quickly lowered his head, pretending to read something important. On the other side, a young woman with a child in her lap also looked away, whispering something to her young daughter who was playing with a stuffed animal. The child, innocent as all children are, pointed to Grace and asked loudly, "Mommy, why is the grandma standing? Is she hurt?" The mother quickly pulled the girl's hand down and scolded her in whispers, as if the question were inappropriate. Grace heard the child's question, and a melancholic smile crossed her face. It was precisely this innocence that was lacking in the adult world, this ability to see the other and genuinely care. She continued her journey towards the back of the bus, where she finally found a small space next to the rear door. It wasn't a seat, but at least she could lean against the metal structure and rest the weight of her body. The minutes passed slowly as the bus snaked through the city streets. Grace watched through the window as the streetlights alternated with the darkness, creating a hypnotic pattern that made her think about life. She remembered the times when she was young, when courtesy and respect were non-negotiable values, when giving up a seat on public transportation was an automatic, almost instinctive gesture. She remembered her husband John, who always said that education was the only inheritance that no one could steal from a person. How things had changed since then. At each stop, new people got on and off, but no one seemed to notice the 82-year-old woman struggling to balance herself in the back of the vehicle. It was as if she were part of the furniture, a fixed element of that urban landscape that didn't deserve special attention. Grace did not complain, did not grumble, did not make a face. She simply accepted the situation with the resignation of someone who has learned that not all battles are worth fighting, especially when one is alone. It was then, at the fifth stop of the night, that a different figure boarded the bus. He was a man of approximately 45 years old, with graying temples, wearing a discreet but impeccably neat uniform. He wasn't military, police, or any obvious authority figure, but he carried a presence that commanded attention with the serenity and firmness of his movements. His name was Carlos, and he worked as a supervisor for a city cleaning company. He had finished his night shift and was going home, as he had done for 15 years, always at the same time, always on the same bus route. Carlos paid his fare, and, as he turned to find a seat, his eyes immediately found Maria. It wasn't a casual or distracted glance, but the kind of attentive observation of someone accustomed to seeing details that others ignore. He saw the cane, he saw the stooped posture, he saw the way she held on to the metallic handrail with each movement. He saw, above all, the quiet dignity with which she endured the situation. Without hesitation, Carlos walked towards the back of the bus. I just reminded everyone that we are more than we think we are. The next day, Maria took the same bus at the same time. When she boarded, the driver greeted her politely and waited for her to settle before departing. Several passengers who had been on the bus the previous night recognized her and discreetly waved. A young man immediately stood up and offered her his seat. She thanked him and sat down, watching out the window and smiling to herself. Carlos was also there at his usual time. When their eyes met, they exchanged a knowing glance, like old friends sharing a special secret. They didn't talk much, they didn't need to. They both knew they had participated in something bigger the previous night, something that transcended their own lives and touched the essence of what it means to be human. Weeks later, other regular passengers on that route began to notice subtle changes. People were more polite, more attentive. Mothers with young children automatically received help. Elderly people were treated with natural deference. People with disabilities found spontaneous assistance. It was as if Carlos's example and Maria's dignity had planted seeds that continued to sprout. One day, a college student who had witnessed the original scene brought it up in a sociology class. The professor was intrigued by the account and decided to conduct an informal survey on how small acts of moral leadership can influence collective behavior. He discovered that bus route had registered a significant reduction in complaints and an increase in praise from users in the weeks following the incident, as it came to be known internally at the transportation company. The driver who had been brusque with Maria on the first night sought out Carlos a few weeks later. "Man, what you said really got to me," he admitted. "I started paying more attention to the passengers, especially the older ones. My mom is 75, and I kept thinking how I would feel if someone treated her the way I treated some passengers." Carlos listened patiently and replied, "The important thing is that you realized. That's what makes the difference." Maria continued her daily routines, doctor's appointments, trips to the market, meetings with friends from her senior citizens group. But she carried with her a renewed energy, a certainty that her existence had value and meaning. She began to be more proactive in her social interactions, greeting neighbors with more enthusiasm, offering help when possible, smiling more openly at strangers on the street. A month after the incident on the bus, Maria encountered Carlos in the bank line. They chatted for a few minutes, exchanging basic information about their lives. She learned that he had two teenage children and cared for his widowed mother. He discovered that she had been an elementary school teacher for 40 years and raised 4 children alone after becoming a widow at a young age. "You taught many children," Carlos said. "And you're teaching many adults," she replied. The story of Maria and Carlos never made the news or social media. It didn't go viral, generate hashtags, or mobilize campaigns. It was just a genuine moment of humanity on a regular bus on a Tuesday night. But its impact was profound and lasting for everyone involved, proving that we don't need grand gestures or public recognition to transform lives and communities. Months later, on a rainy afternoon, Carlos boarded the same bus and saw a familiar scene. A man in a wheelchair was struggling to board while other passengers grew impatient. Without hesitation, he stood up and offered his assistance, organizing the necessary space and asking others to cooperate. The driver waited patiently, and other passengers spontaneously mobilized to facilitate boarding. The woman accompanying the wheelchair user thanked him, deeply moved. "It's not common to find people like you," she said. Carlos smiled and replied, "Actually, it's more common than we think. Sometimes we just need to remind each other of who we really are." And as the bus continued its journey through the night city, he thought of Maria, of how small encounters can alter entire trajectories, of how the dignity of one person can awaken the humanity in many others. Today, whenever we encounter indifference or disrespect, we can choose to be passive observers or agents of change. The story of Maria and Carlos reminds us that each of us carries the power to shift atmospheres, to restore dignity, to plant seeds of empathy that will grow far beyond what we can imagine. They teach us that heroism doesn't require uniforms or recognition. It only requires the courage to see the other as they truly are, a human being worthy of consideration and respect. And so, in a city that continues its frenetic and often insensitive life, two ordinary people proved that humanity still beats strong in the hearts of those who choose to cultivate it. They proved that small acts of kindness echo far louder than grand speeches, that genuine respect touches more deeply than any display of power, and that it's never too late to rediscover the beauty of simply caring for one another. The last time Carlos saw Maria was on a Sunday morning, in the square near the bus terminal. She was sitting on a bench feeding pigeons with breadcrumbs, smiling at children playing nearby. He waved from afar, she waved back, and both continued on their way, knowing they had been part of something special, a silent lesson on how small moments of dignity can illuminate entire worlds.